Hello, I'm Tessa Whitman, and today I'm going to talk to you about the human dimensions of sagebrush ecosystem management and identified gaps. A quick roadmap. First, I will introduce you to my research, discuss methods and results, and then I'll dive into the discussion on governance, collaboration, perceptions and attitudes, and I'll finish with my conclusions and what I learned. The American West hosts a unique diversity of landscapes and people, but one thing is ubiquitous: sagebrush. An iconic ecosystem of the West, sagebrush presents distinct management challenges, including balancing grazing and recreation, mitigating wildfire and invasive plants, and maintaining viable economies while supporting cultural preservation. This biome supports food production, including ranching and farming, significant wildlife populations, substantial energy extraction, and critical ecosystem services for its inhabitants. Productivity in sagebrush is extensive, but concerns about sustainable land use have increased in recent decades. Historically, sagebrush habitat covered about 112 million acres in North America, but is now reduced to a fragmented 45 million acres. Some populations of sagebrush obligate species have declined due, in part, to this habitat fragmentation. Declining greater sage-grouse populations through the 20th century and the potential of sage-grouse listing under the Endangered Species Act instigated a Western United States regional collaboration to conserve the species. Regional collaboration has worked to develop management plans with the goal of maintaining and increasing sage-grouse population numbers. While this collaborative initiative has substantially increased research into the biophysical nature of sagebrush habitats and the species that rely on those habitats, research into the human dimensions of sagebrush management is lacking. Understanding the human dimensions of ecosystem management is critical to successful conservation. Failure to account for human dimensions in ecosystem management planning can alienate stakeholders, ignore important factors in ecosystem degradation, and overlook vital tools that could improve outcomes, resulting in suboptimal management strategies. Taking human dimensions into consideration allows us to better understand the motivations behind human behavior. Thus, we can tailor our management plans to capitalize on those motivations. To better understand the drivers behind the decision-making, collaboration, and management strategies in sagebrush, we conducted this literature review. Our goal was to assess what sagebrush social science research has been done and what research is needed on the human dimensions of sagebrush management and conservation. Social science is an umbrella under which a variety of disciplines fall. For the purpose of this research, we cast a broad net to include studies from economics, political science, social psychology, sociology, governance, anthropology, and other social science fields. The methods for our literature review followed principles of systematic methods. We used predetermined and standardized protocols for identifying and extracting data from relevant literature. We used Web of Science to search the literature, developed a set of search terms from our research questions and stakeholder input, and expanded those search terms using keywords from known relevant literature. Our initial search, using 132 search terms, identified over 16,000 publications. The first round of inclusion criteria identified 171 papers. The second, more vigorous round of inclusion criteria, which identified literature explicitly concerned with social science research in sagebrush ecosystems, identified 95 papers. We coded those 95 papers to characterize geographic focus, social issues, resource issues, and key findings. We then further narrowed our pool by eliminating any papers that we had identified as concept papers because they did not use replicable methods. We then comprehensively analyzed papers from social science categories containing 15 or more papers and with an overlap between social and resource issues of 4 or more papers. From those papers, we extracted the research questions, hypotheses, goals, and key findings. Our results found a distribution of sagebrush social science studies from nationwide down to state and regional research. Of the 75 papers identified, 19 were focused in the Western US, 15 in Utah, 6 had a national scope, 12 were focused in Oregon, and research in Wyoming, Idaho, and Colorado represented 9 papers per state. The rest of the states represented 4 or few papers each. We then constructed a matrix to identify where the greatest overlap between social and resource issues occurred, and we found the greatest overlap in resource and social issues to be on sage-grouse and collaboration. The second highest level of overlap was between land use and governance, followed by sage-grouse and governance and fire, governance and rangeland, and perceptions and attitudes and land use. This research was also done in conjunction with a larger study for the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and we used the data from that study to inform the identified gaps. That research was conducted in 2018 and 2019 and included surveys, interviews, and focus groups throughout sagebrush range. So governance was our most prolific category, and a common theme that emerged from social science research related to governance in sagebrush was a call for more local involvement in decision-making processes. Research related to sage-grouse management cited a need for stakeholder agency and management strategies, implementation of regulatory measures and long-term monitoring. A strong emphasis was placed on development of management strategies that support local livelihoods and lifestyles. Governance and fire management strategies are seen to lead to improved social and ecological outcomes when local stakeholders are involved. Specifically, the formation of rangeland fire protection associations in Eastern Oregon and Western Idaho have significantly reduced conflict between stakeholders and agency managers. They have contributed to rapid containment of wildfire while supporting local stewardship of the landscape. Issues concerning the hierarchy of decision-making arose in some studies, citing a need for better communication between agency representatives and stakeholders, both before a wildfire ignites and during containment. Improved collaboration in fire governance, supported by communication avenues established in the formation of rangeland fire protection associations, can also lead to better preventative management, improved trust between agencies and stakeholders, and ultimately a reduced fuels load and reduction in potential for catastrophic wildfires. The bulk of literature on collaboration was focused on the structure and function of local working groups, or LWGs. Research found that the presence of a neutral facilitator was critical to successful LWG conservation plan development and implementation. Structured membership expectations and requirements and devoting time towards work focused on building trust between members are additional factors critical to successful LWGs. Initiatives in the Gunnison Basin provide an example of what has not worked and what has. Initial LWG formation lacked structure in membership and decision-making and lacked substantive results. Reformation of conservation planning into a strategic committee with structured membership requirements and a well-defined decision-making process informed by subcommittees of specialists resulted in successful outcomes. A focus on consensus building and democratic processes are additional factors important for successful collaboration. By providing a platform for all members to voice their opinions and have substantive input in the decision-making process, LWGs can unify stakeholders and approach initiatives with strong local support. Some research found that a sense of ownership over collaborative plans is foundational to the dynamics leading to successful initiatives. Utilization of democratic processes and consensus building in the decision-making process may facilitate that sense of ownership among members. While consensus is an important focus, it often lengthens the decision-making process and can lead to stagnation. By formatting the collaborative process to allow for decisions made by a majority vote when consensus is elusive, local working groups can maintain forward motion. Landowner perceptions and attitudes are affected by family history on the land, personal ownership rights, awareness of management concerns, and prevalence of public lands in the region. In states where public lands compose significant portions of the landscape, landowners have a greater sense of duty to undertake management actions that are socially acceptable or maintain ecosystem services. As sagebrush land ownership continues to change, maintaining ecosystem services may be accomplished by supporting new markets, including state-facilitated hunter access programs. In Utah, these programs were found to conserve and improve wildlife habitat while supporting open spaces. Continued landscape fragmentation due to subdivision is a concern throughout the sagebrush range. Outreach programs to inform new landowners about proactive land management methods can be beneficial to combating invasives and mitigating wildfire, but those outreach methods and materials must be tailored to the appropriate demographic. In conclusion, while the body of social science research in the sagebrush biome is expanding, that research is scattered through a variety of journals and disciplines and lacks a cohesive focus. Where sage-grouse biophysical research is approaching a critical mass, social science related to sage-grouse conservation is far from that threshold. Rather, our understanding of the human dimensions of sagebrush ecosystem management has ample room for expansion. We do know that local buy-in, stakeholder agency and decision-making, and collaboration between agencies and stakeholders all can improve management implementation and lead to improved ecological outcomes. Substantial ecological problems plague the American West, from invasive plants to wildfire, habitat fragmentation to rangeland productivity. These issues point to a need for additional targeted and cohesive research into biome-specific social science. Land and wildlife managers throughout the West indicate a need for increased knowledge about the economic implications of wildfire, appropriate tools for communicating invasive plant eradication methods, and means to quantify the value of and develop markets for ecosystem services. Some research has approached these questions, but substantial knowledge gaps remain. While this research has synthesized the known relevant social science research in sagebrush, the absence of certain social science research in this synthesis is also an important finding. We did not find substantial research into the human dimensions of wild horse and burrow management, a contentious and pressing issue in sagebrush ecosystems. Cooperative federalism in wildfire, related to wildfire management in Oregon and Idaho, has been researched, but research on this mode of governance is lacking in other regions and related to other resource issues. Social science research in sagebrush is also lacking on energy development, ecosystem services, local knowledge, invasive plant management, conservation practices and incentives, and climate change. Additionally, what research has been conducted may be suffering from bias. Previous research identified the primary stakeholders represented in rangeland social science to be ranchers, farmers, and landowners. Our sagebrush social science research comes to the same conclusions, and additionally recommends future social science research focused on more diverse stakeholders. Notably, tribal input is utterly lacking in this field. Considering the paucity of social science research including tribal input as well as local knowledge, there is potential for significant improvement in sagebrush management if future work is focused on inclusive research, representative of the diversity of stakeholders in this biome. Finally, integrating social science research into land management policy is an important step that can help improve ecological outcomes. What I learned during this research is that all the science in the world won't lead to positive ecological outcomes unless you get the people on board. Human dimensions are critical to successful ecosystem management. Also, social science is very poorly integrated into our current management systems and policies, and developing concrete methods to integrate social science is our next big challenge. And finally, writing a literature synthesis for your first manuscript is not a very good idea, especially when you're not an expert in any of the disciplines. Thank you for listening.